initial career, जब मैंने qualify किया as a chartered accountant, my initial career was started at the sales tax, and therefore I always look at the sales tax, traditionally sales tax, now known as the state GST department, as my alma mater, and it's always my pleasure to accept an invitation to speak amongst all of you and share my thoughts. And as I keep on speaking, maybe we could take a few questions. Being a online platform, perhaps it may not be possible to have mute unmute at in interim, but maybe we can allot some time towards the end for question answers, and maybe it would be fun to interact with you over the next couple of hours on this topic of GST applicability on transport services. Now, when we come to transport, at a state tax level, we have always been used to and familiar with various terminologies and documents issued by transporters. Even when while transport has always been known to be a service, because of the BST Act, CST Act, and thereafter the MVET Act and the CST Act, we have been trained to look at various documents. Let it be called an LR, let it be called a railway receipt. Whenever there's a CST claim, we always look along with C form. We used to look at whether there is a proper transport proof to suggest that there was a movement of goods from one state to the another. Similarly, when somebody does a high seas sale, the endorsement on bill of lading, which is a very critical document for allowance of the high seas claim. So to that extent, as state tax officers, even prior to GST coming into place, we were slightly involved in knowing the documentations which are being issued by the transporters. But at the same time, we never had an opportunity to chip into what the transporters actually do. That is because of two reasons. One is their primary activity constituting services was outside the purview of the state tax net, because what states could tax earlier in the pre-GST regime was only the service sales and not services. And secondly, the definition of dealer itself very specifically excluded transporters. And therefore, even if the transporters, you had some incidental sale of goods like used vehicles or tires, etc., they used to claim the benefit of that exception to the definition of the dealer. And therefore, the transporters were not registered dealers under the sales tax law or the VAT law, which we had prior to the introduction of GST. Now, as we all know, GST has been a what you can say a leveler. It has merged taxation of goods and services, and there's a dual power. We are all aware of all those fundamentals, and therefore we now have a scenario where transporters become assessees under the GST law. Of course, there are certain provisions relating to reverse charge mechanism and all, which we will walk through as we go through the presentation. But primarily, yes, transport comes within the ambit of taxation, and once it comes within the ambit of taxation, maybe it's important to have an understanding of the transport sector much beyond the documents which they issue in relation to movement of goods. And that's where I think training sessions like this really help each of us understand the perspectives of one another, understand a little bit about the sectoral specifics in a neutral manner. As enforcing officers, many a times when you assess a transport sector client, you would understand the businesses, but maybe this provides a neutral platform where, in the absence of any specific case, we could discuss how businesses work in the transport sector, what are the apparent tax implications thereon. And of course, as we all know, law is something where there are always possible interpretations, and some of the controversies also we will try to touch upon. I would now start the presentation. I'll share my screen, and just let me know if you are able to see my screen. Are you able to see the screen? If someone can just unmute and let me know.
Yes, we can see.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. So with that little bit of a preamble, what we plan to cover today is primarily two sectors, transportation and to some extent logistics, and there are shades of overlap or intermingling between the two, because many a times the same dealer or the taxpayer would be undertaking both those activities, and therefore while our primary concentration today would be on transportation, as we keep on speaking about that, we will have some shades of logistics or some ancillary incomes related to logistics, wherein we will be discussing the tax implications thereof. As far as transportation is concerned, there is a different set of provisions for domestic transportation vis-a-vis international transportation. And all of us do understand that when the goods move within the country, that there would be a different set of implications in terms of taxes and every other, even the operational parameters. Whereas in case of international transportation relating to export of goods or relating to import of goods, there would be a separate set of situations which we will have to deal with. So we'll deal with both of them in extreme detail in the next few slides. Along with that, naturally, many of the transporters also undertake storage warehousing on behalf of the client, or at least procure the storage and warehousing on their behalf. Cargo handling, because the cargo has to be loaded, unloaded into the vehicles and temporarily stored at times. Many entities also act as clearing and forwarding agents, and we are aware of this concept of clearing and forwarding agents because even under the old regime, there was this concept of F-firm, whereby the clearing and forwarding agents would at times raise invoices on behalf of the principal and discharge even the taxes on behalf of the principal. This concept needs to be slightly distinguished from the concept of custom house agent, who typically does not raise invoices on behalf of the principal, but merely helps him in clearing the goods. Under the service tax law, we had very interesting decisions in understanding the distinction between clearing and forwarding versus a person who does only clearing or only forwarding. Some of those decisions, of course, now have been put to rest, but some of those principles may be important in understanding some of the issues which might come up in live cases. And there could be many other activities which logistics companies really do undertake. Sometimes they also help in a process known as kitting, wherein they do a sort of an intermediary job work in a custom bonded warehouse. Sometimes they also help you in cleaning the products or assembling and repacking the products. So there are various other services which are provided by the logistics entities, including 3PL logistics, wherein they would undertake to really manage your inventory and also give you estimates of when you need your inventories, what should be your procurement plans, etc. So this, I think, is the broad gamut, and of course there could be many more areas which one can really talk about when one looks at the transport and logistics sector. It's really a very large and a humongous sector covering n number of activities within it. We'll now go into the specifics of each of them. And I'll start with firstly the domestic transport, because that's where we'll see there are lots of provisions and there is also a substantial element of confusion in many of these areas. And while we will talk about it, all of the discussions which we are going to have has a legacy from the service tax regime. And under the service tax regime, there was a service tax applicable on many of these activities. Some activities were consciously kept outside the purview of service tax. Some of them continue to be outside the purview of GST as well. And there are some policy reasons for that. As we move into those specifics, we'll talk about it. But at a very conceptual and a fundamental level, if let us say X wants to transport his goods, like X is in Bombay and he has sold goods to Y, who is in Delhi. In that case, I would believe that whenever you're looking at a domestic transport, the domestic transport can be undertaken by multiple modes. And depending on the mode of the transportation, we have seen that the service tax law kept on evolving itself. There were different provisions for taxation of transportation services when they were undertaken by road, as compared to when they were done by rail, as compared to when they were done by air. One might question what is this domestic transportation by a vessel, but India, as we know, has a huge coastline, and of the last decade or so, we have seen a lot of traction on this front, that people have started finding innovative, less costly, though time consuming, but less costly means of transportation. So it's very common nowadays to use a concept known as coastal transportation, wherein the goods are loaded at one port in India and delivered to another port within India itself, and it just the ship would sail from one side of the coast to the other side of the coast. In fact, there's a very heavy movement of this type of coastal transportation from the western zone, especially when you look at the ports like Kandla, etc. There's a lot of movement from there all the way to the eastern coast, and vice versa. So that is also one dimension which might come into place. Similarly, there is an inland movement wherein rivers are used, and boats on rivers are used for the purposes of transportation of goods. So therefore, we see that there could be variations based on what is the mode through which the goods are intended to be transported. And based on that, the classifications, the HSNs, and even the tax implications would keep on changing. So therefore, From this background, we go into specifics of them one by one. The first one which we'll discuss and we'll spend some time on is transportation of goods by road. As you know, this is a very common mode of transportation. The number of vehicles plying on the road, the quantum of cargo which they carry is substantial. To a large extent, this is an unorganized sector, and therefore you find various situations coming in. When you look at transportation of goods by road, I'll take and we'll start with a very simplistic example wherein the seller, and we will take an example of a seller and a buyer of goods. Let's say somebody is selling cement. So therefore, a person who is selling cement, he has two options if he wants to transport goods by road. Either if he has his own vehicles, he can transport it himself. He can employ a driver or hire a driver for on a contractual basis, on a daily basis, and use his own vehicle and transport the cement in his own vehicles. Second scenario would be that he would hire those vehicles from third parties on long lease, monthly lease, 3-monthly lease or a yearly lease, and he would transport in that. And we see this is very commonplace, especially when you look at RMC and all. You always find that those vehicles, including oil transportation, you find that those vehicles are very specifically made to cater to an individual company's cargo only. In fact, the entire outer container, everything is painted to name the company, and there is a succinct advertisement of the company also, which happens in these types of transportation. In these cases, what happens is that there is really a transportation of the cement or whatever that product is by the company itself. That is one way of structuring the transaction. The other way, which is again very common, is that you will appoint a third party and you will hand over your goods to the third party and tell that third party that, look, you have to transport the goods from X location to Y location, let's say Mumbai to Delhi. Now, again, that can be generally, as we characterize it, as by a goods transport agency. And this term is very important. It's defined, and we'll understand that in the next few minutes. Sometimes in case of urgency, you might transport it through a express cargo. Costly goods like diamonds, jewelry, etc. can be transported through a courier. Now, as we know, there is a substantial difference between a courier and a GTA. A courier issues what is known as a consignment note, what they say, but technically it is not a transferable or a negotiable document. As compared to that, when you look at a GTA, he issues a lorry receipt. That lorry receipt, as we all know, is a transferable document. All of us have assessed examples of Rule 6, Section 6(2) claim sale in transit, and wherein there is a transfer of goods, title in the goods while the goods are in movement. Now that is enabled in the GTM mode, but as far as a courier is concerned, a courier is essentially a fundamental element of a service rather than a bailment type of a scenario. And therefore, there is a separate tax implication for couriers and express cargoes, as we might put it. And then you have any other mode of transportation by third parties, and we'll understand what that is as we go into the technical discussion of each of them. This, I think, sort of sets the context of the sector within which we will try to look at each individual situation and then discuss the tax implications of that specific situation. Before I really go into the specifics, I just want a very quick feedback. If one of you all can just unmute yourself, that are you all comfortable with the speed, and am I audible enough? Well, do I need to increase or reduce the speed, or is this fine? If any one of you can just unmute and just give me that feedback, so that I will tailor my further talk. Because in a physical program, I am able to view the participants and get a cue. But here that is not feasible. So if someone can just let me know that is this speed fine, or do I need to increase or reduce the speed?
Hello. Is it okay, sir?
It's okay. Okay. Yeah. So with that background, let's now move into the first part, wherein we just talked about a scenario where, let's say, a company has his own vehicles, and in his own vehicles, he is transporting the goods from one location to another. Now, naturally, when he is transporting the goods, he is actually a seller of the goods. On the sale of the goods, he would charge the GST as applicable. But there is really no element of service, because as we all know, whenever we look at service, that service has to be a supply. And the definition of supply itself would require the existence of two parties, existence of a consideration being paid by one party to another, and the activity of transportation being done by one person for another person and not for oneself. So in that sense, there is really no element of a supply of a transportation service here. Now, as we know, there are various scenarios where even when I am using my own transportation vehicle as a seller, I might tell the customer that, look, I am selling you the goods.
सर प्लीज अनम्यूट कीजिए, मैंने म्यूट ऑल किया था, सॉरी सर.
Sorry. So as we know that even when a seller is transporting goods in his own vehicles or in some other manner, as a part of the sale process, there might be terms and conditions wherein the seller will say, I am selling you goods for 100 rupees, but I will also recover a transport charge, which we know as freight, etc., for 5 rupees. And this model was existing in the old law as well. Such recovery of transport charges from the buyer is a part of the sale price of goods, and under section 15, this position was there under the old law as well. Of course, the CST Act permitted an express deduction for this recovery of transport charges, but under the GST law, clearly these recoveries of transport charges from the buyer is a part of the sale price, and depending on the tax rate of the product, the said rate will apply to the transport charges also, and the total taxable value for supply of goods will get increased. Now, when you are having this type of a scenario, please understand that at the buyer end, and because that is where many a times we see some challenges coming at the time of assessment, at the buyer's end, he might book both the expenses separately. But that does not mean that he has received a transportation service. Just like the seller has not provided a transportation service here and has only sold the goods at a bit of a higher value. Same way for the buyer also, he has never received a transport service. What he has received the goods at a higher value. And therefore, as a logical consequence, at the buyer end also, there will not be any reverse charge mechanism. Now, for accounting purposes, many a times the buyer might put the purchase account separately and the transport cost in a separate account. Now that's where at the times of audit, at the times of assessment, when the reconciliation is sought, there are some challenges which come up, and this is where I thought it's important to get sensitized that these types of transactions, there is really no receipt of service to trigger a reverse charge mechanism at the buyer end. Now at the supplier end, once again, when they buy vehicles for their own purposes, there will be a GST implication at the vehicle company. The selling company would charge the GST on the sale price of the vehicle, and that would be available as input tax credit. Section 17(5) deals with block credits, but as we all know, 17(5)(a) blocks credits only in relation to passenger vehicles like motor cars, etc. As far as transport vehicles are concerned, there is no blocking of credits. So therefore, they would be eligible for the credit of the GST charged on the purchase of the vehicle. They would also be eligible for credit of the repairs and other expenses, spare parts, which are involved in the maintenance of those vehicles. So I think that is the simplistic starting point of the discussion, wherein we talk about transportation of goods by road, by self in our own vehicles. Now, when we move to our next example, here we have a scenario where the company says, I want to transport the goods myself, but I don't want to invest in the price of the vehicle. So they obtain the vehicles from third party on a hire. And we have seen those cases in the past, and there have been litigation also in various scenarios where we are aware that, under our old law, there was concept called of transfer of a right to use goods along with possession and without possession. And if it was along with possession, transfer of possession, then it was a deemed sale under the old law, and therefore there was a VAT applicable. And if there was no possession being transferred, then it was deemed to be a service. Under the service tax law, we had a specific category called supply of tangible goods services, and service tax was applicable. This mutual divide between supply of goods and services was there under the old regime. Irrespective of that, when the vehicle is hired, taken on a hire, the scenario which needs to be looked at is because there could be various types of contracts over here. So just we go back to the same example which we were saying, that X, who is a seller in Mumbai, wants to transport cement to Y, who is a buyer in Delhi. He has the cement in his warehouses. Now Z is a third party who has a vehicle and a driver also, and an operator also for that matter. There could be a different types of arrangements between X and Z. Now naturally for the said transportation, there could be two different ways in which the arrangement could be. One is Z says, I give my vehicle at your disposal and my driver. There will be certain SOPs that yes, this is how I will make sure that the driver reports in time, he uses efficiently the diesel and the fuel. And even while there is a transportation, he takes reasonable time within which the goods get transported to the destination and all those things. But essentially a fleet of vehicles is deputed by Z at X's premises, maybe the factory or the warehouse, and the entire loading, unloading, everything is handled by X, the seller. In this scenario, there is no bailment. There is no scenario that the cement is handed over by the seller to the third party. It is a scenario where the vehicle is given by the third party to the seller. This constitutes a rental service of transport vehicles. This falls under HSN 9966 and it is equivalent to what we just discussed under the old regime, a deemed sale or a supply of tangible goods, depending on whether it is with operators or without operators. The tax rate here is 18% and the tax will be charged on forward charge basis, which means general rule will apply that Z being the supplier of the service, he will be required to collect the GST from the X, who is only obtaining the vehicles on a rental basis. Now compare that with another scenario. Again, this is contractual and factual, where X says, look, these are my cement which I need to get transported. For transporting these cements, I need these types of vehicles. I will hand over the cement to you. You transport the cement from Bombay to Delhi, and please make sure that the transportation is done correctly and issue me a document. The document, which as we know under the Motor Vehicles Act, is a lorry receipt. Now in that scenario, what is the nature of the supply? It totally changes. Here it becomes a services of a goods transport agency in relation to transportation of goods. The HSN becomes 9967, where you have two rates, 5% under reverse charge mechanism or 12% under forward charge mechanism. So this I think is an important aspect which would change in each individual facts depending on how the entire transaction is structured, what are the contractual obligations between that third party. I'm purposefully not using the word transporter because in one case he may be a transporter, in another case he may not be a transporter, he may be just a hirer. Therefore, depending on the type of the arrangements and the legal obligations which flow between that third party and the person who is intending to get the goods transported, the classification would change, the tax implications would also change. And so therefore this becomes a little bit interesting to understand. So when you're looking at hiring of vehicles, this we already talked about, it is liable under forward charge basis at the rate of 18%. Now, as you know, to complicate things, we are also aware that this Z, if he is a GTA, he may not be the only person who will own all the vehicles. He might again obtain vehicles from some Mr. A who is a fourth party. And there could be a chain of people where the transactions might keep on happening, but the vehicles can be of some truck owners, and there is a huge sector of unorganized individual truck owners. And therefore, those truck owners would then give their trucks on hire either to an end person or a company which is transporting goods, or they might be more closer to a GTA or a transporter, and they will hire the vehicle, they'll give the vehicles to a GTA, and the GTA will then enter into a contract with the company for transportation of goods. So in those scenarios to save, hello. So in those scenarios to safeguard and keep these unorganized.
Sir, sorry, unmute yourself. प्लीज माईक कडे लक्ष द्या, माईक तुमचा ऑन करू देऊ नका, सगळ्यांना डिस्टर्ब होत आहे. Carry on, sir. Sorry. Sir, you need to unmute yourself. पार्टिसिपंट्सना विनंती आहे की कृपया सेशन चालू असताना कुठलंही ऑन बटन किंवा काही करू नये. सेशनचा वेळ फुकट जातो.
Hello, am I audible now?
Yes, sir. Extremely sorry, sir.
Oh, that's fine. I wasn't able to unmute myself for a minute or so, yeah, now it's fine. Okay, so what we were discussing was a scenario of hiring versus a transportation, and as we said that there could be multiple models. There could be A who owns a vehicle. He might be a single vehicle owner, an entrepreneur who has just started this activity, and maybe he has invested and taken a loan and bought one vehicle, and then he is hiring this to he approaches a GTA, and that GTA will have 20-30 such people. He will get all these vehicles and then he will push it to a company. Now in these types of scenarios, we want to safeguard that individual drivers from the tax implications, and therefore there is an exemption entry whereby if a person is hiring a transport vehicle to a goods transport agency, then GST is not applicable. Such an entry existed under the service tax law also. And for those who are more academically inclined, when service tax was introduced on transport sector, there was a lot of debate and there was a parliamentary committee which was set up, and thereafter there was a concept paper, a white paper which was introduced, and the entire levy of service tax on GTA came in based on that white paper. And it's interesting to read that white paper because there was a lot of arguments in favor of bringing a service tax and against bringing a service tax, and the perspectives are very nicely explained in that scenario. But depending on whether the hiring is therefore we are saying depending on whether the hiring is to the end company or whether it is to a GTA, the tax implications will change. If it is to the end company, the person who is hiring the vehicle will charge 18%. But if he is hiring a vehicle to a GTA, then there is an exemption wide entry 22, and therefore there will not be any GST applicable on that. What is important to note that is in the case of hiring of vehicles, there is no reverse charge mechanism, and therefore the person who earns the higher charges or the income will be the subject matter of taxation and not the person who spends the money and incurs the expenditure. Also, in case of hiring of vehicles, in many cases, it would constitute a continuous supply of service. As you know, in a continuous supply of service, there is an option available whereby the invoice can be raised at periodic rests, and that's very commonly done in case of hiring arrangements, that as and when need based, the vehicles are hired, and then at the end of the month or a quarterly basis, a statement is prepared of the number of vehicles hired and the charges for it, and a single invoice is raised for all the services rendered for a month or 2 months or 3 months. It's again very common in case of courier arrangements also, because every day you can't go and pay 10 rupees and 20 rupees. So instead of that, every time there is what we can say an account created by the courier agency, he will keep in his system a record of whatever he is couriering or transporting on your behalf. And based on that, he will, at the end of the month, he will make a consolidated single invoice for the said purpose. So this is as far as hiring of vehicles is concerned. And we now move into the next area, which is relating to the goods transport agencies. And to understand what is a goods transport agency, we have to go, and of course one would expect a better placement, but be as it may, the definition of goods transport agency is provided through our exemption notification rather than in the act itself. Well, so be as it may, note 2ZE of notification 11 provides the meaning or the definition of goods transport agency. And what it says is a goods transport agency or a GTA means any person who provides a service in relation to transport of goods. So this is the key. In the earlier example, we said depending on the contract, either the hirer is giving a vehicle or he is giving a service of transport of goods. So depending on what is the contractual arrangement, this can change. Naturally, because we are talking of GTA, it has to be a transport of goods by road and issues a consignment note. Now this is very important. Traditionally, under the service tax law, we have always understood, and we'll talk about a few judgments later on depending on the time availability. We've always understood that the consignment note, issuance of a consignment note by whatever name called, like the LR, etc., is the key basis for classification of a service as a GTA. Now this becomes very, very important because as we all know, this consignment note or a lorry receipt is a negotiable document. You can go to a bank and pledge the consignment note. You might endorse the consignment note, and while the goods are in movement, and you can, by endorsement of a consignment note, you can say that yes, I am transferring the title in the goods. And therefore, if there is such a document issued and whereby the transporter takes over the goods for the purposes of transportation, takes over the risks of the goods as well while in transportation, because in these types of situations, if there is a loss of goods or a damage, the GTA is responsible to make good that loss, and that is the responsibility which he takes in a case of a GTA. So to summarize, three important conditions before one can say a transaction is relating to a GTA. The service should be in relation to transportation of goods. It should be in relation to transportation of goods by a road, and there should be a consignment note. Now, while we say there should be a consignment note, the term consignment note itself is not defined under the GST law. Under the service tax law, there was a specific rule which obligated a person to issue a consignment note. Here, Rule 54(3) under the GST law talks about something like this, but this Rule 54 is relating to a tax invoice and not relating to a consignment note. And what Rule 54(3) typically says is that where a supplier of a service is a GTA supplying goods in relation to transportation of goods, the said supplier shall issue a tax invoice or any other document in lieu thereof by whatever name called, containing. Now, if you look at the contents, these contents which are mentioned after this word containing are all contents of a consignment note. Now, ideally, there should have been two rules because under the service tax regime, there were two rules. One rule obliging a GTA to issue a consignment note. Another rule obliging the GTA to issue an invoice, and maybe some activity, some parts or information should be in the consignment note, some should be in the tax invoice. But here, the way it is worded, they are saying that they shall issue a tax invoice, which will include so many things. And what are those things? They say it's basically all the typical attributes of a consignment note, which is the gross weight of the consignment, name of the consignor, consignee, the vehicle number, the details of the goods transported, origin, destination, and GSTN of the person liable to pay the tax on this transaction. So typically, somewhere the GST looks at a sort of a merger or a subsumation of a tax invoice and a consignment note, and this is where there is a legal challenge in the way the entire law is drafted, and therefore one may say whether the consignment note or a document of this nature becomes pivotal to the levy of GST in RCM is a matter which will have to be examined by the courts. Under the service tax law, we have a lot of decisions. Many of them are saying that if there is no consignment note issued by the GTA, then the person doesn't become a GTA at all, and therefore reverse charge mechanism does not apply. So that is one area where we might see some action coming up as time progresses. But assuming that yes, there is a consignment note, there is a supply of goods, transportation of goods by road, in that case, we go to the legal provisions. And when we go to the legal provisions, this notification 13 is the major notification which talks about reverse charge mechanism in GTA. And what it says is, it says that if a GTA supplies services in respect of transportation of goods by road to a set of people, and they've given a set of service recipients to whom the transportation services are provided. So if a GTA is providing this transport service to a factory, a society, a cooperative society, a registered person under any of the GST laws, a body corporate, a partnership firm, AOP, or any casual taxable person. In all these cases, we are told that the GTA will not pay the GST. It is going to be the recipient of the service who will discharge the GST. There is another option, and we'll park that option for the time being because it's an option available to the transporter. But the generic rule is that if the services are provided by a GTA to any of these A to G listed entities, in that case, the A to G listed entities which are paying the freight will be required to discharge the GST, and therefore whenever there is an assessment of a normal taxpayer who is into trading of goods or manufacturing of goods, one part of the assessment always is look at the debit side of the P&L account, find whether they have incurred any transport expenses, and if they have incurred transport expenses, examine whether the RCM on that transport expenses has been duly discharged or not. So that is where the RCM comes into place, where the entity is either a factory, society, cooperative society, or a registered person, or a body corporate, a partnership firm. You will see that here what is primarily excluded is proprietary, but that proprietary concern also, if he is registered under the GST, he is still here. Yeah, so therefore, a major set of transport services goes under reverse charge mechanism. An important exception which we are told is that this entry will not apply when the services are provided by the GTA to a government, and therefore that's where the government as recipients of services have been absolved of this entire RCM responsibility. But except that, you have all these scenarios where there is a responsibility on the recipient to discharge the GST. What if the recipient is not one of those A to G entities? And that's where you have another entry, and this entry is under an exemption notification. Entry 21A of the exemption notification says services provided by a GTA to an unregistered person, including an unregistered casual taxable person other than a factory, society, cooperative society, body corporate, partnership firm, casual taxable person. So in this scenario, we are told that there is an exemption from GST, and therefore if you read this entry 21A, which exempts services rendered by a GTA to an unregistered person, and this entry which pushes a reverse charge mechanism for services rendered by GTA to a registered person, amongst the other things there is a registered person also, one finds that these two notifications or entries are cumulatively exhaustive. So all scenarios where a GTA renders a service, he will render either to a registered person or to an unregistered person. If he renders the service to a registered person, then it will be under reverse charge mechanism. If he renders the service to an unregistered person, then it will be under an exemption. So friends, the cumulative effect of both these entries means that a GTA who provides services in relation to transportation of goods is technically not required to register, he is not required to pay the tax. And as we know, because there is no tax liability, and as we know, there is section 23, and there's also a notification which says that if an entity is only into exempted services, or if all the services are under a reverse charge mechanism, then that person is not liable for registration as well. So that is where both these entries become very important from a GTA perspective, which somewhere give them to a large extent a license to stay unregistered from the purview of the GST law. But having said that, there are some caveats, and those caveats, so this I think summarizes this entire process. And having said that, there are some caveats, and the whole major part of the caveat comes from the fact that unlike the VAT regime where the transporter was excluded from the definition of the dealer itself, here a GTA is not excluded from the definition of the taxpayer or a person, and therefore what transpires is if a GTA sells goods, what this entire entry covers only transportation of goods by road, but it doesn't cover scenarios where there is a sale of a vehicle or a scrap or a used tire or things like that. So therefore, if a GTA has any of those types of incidental activities, the definition of business is wide enough to cover these types of incidental activities also. And for these activities, there is neither an exemption nor a reverse charge mechanism applicable. So effectively, if there is some activity of this nature, the GTA is forced to obtain a registration and pay taxes only vis-a-vis those small activities. And that's where I think the larger part of this entire issue comes in. That essentially the whole objective of reverse charge mechanism when it was introduced in service tax was really to keep the GTA out of the registration purview. And in GST, just by keeping reverse charge mechanism, we are not really insulating the GTA from registration. He would still require a registration. Some of them may not take it because of ignorance, and that may amount to a bit of a non-compliance. But technically, most of them would have some tire sales or some asset sales, and therefore they would require a registration. Now, if that be the case, there is a question of whether RCM really makes any sense. If the government is confident enough that the GTA can collect and pay, it may make sense for them to collect and pay rather than in all the millions of SSEs. Everywhere they have to, at the month, every month make the calculation in Excel, take out the data from various GLs and do all that. So that is one thought which I would just like to bounce across you, that it complicates things for everyone, not only the taxpayer, but also the department, because at the time of assessment, one needs to get an assurance that the taxes have been correctly claimed. And at times, when going through all these aspects of GTA and all, we are, the time available to the officers will also be limited. And in spending too much time on this, some major issue may also get left out because of the want of time. And therefore, there are 2 points here. End of the day, as far as the taxpayer is concerned, he pays this tax under RCM, service receiver, and he immediately claims the input tax credit also. And therefore, in B2B cases, there is really no tax which any of the government gets. Whether this RCM can be converted to forward charge or whether there can be an outright exemption only for all these activities is something which is a policy decision which you all may reflect and maybe at time, if possible, may influence this aspect. So that moving to the exemptions, there are some specific exemptions carved out for the GTA. And as we talked about, services provided by a GTA to a department is exempted under entry 21B. Now there is another entry where specific types of goods, if they are transported, they are given an exemption. So we are told services provided by a GTA for agricultural transportation of agricultural produce, milk, salt, food grains, flour, pulses, rice, organic manure, newspapers and magazines, relief materials for disasters, calamities, and defense and military equipment. This, if there is a GTA who is transporting these goods, naturally there is an exemption for that, and therefore there will not be any GST on that transaction. Thereafter, there is a small value exemption wherein we are told that if the consideration, the transport charges for a single trip, if it does not exceed 1,500, and in that case there is an exemption, then there is no requirement for payment of GST. And similarly, if let's say that vehicle has multiple loads, in that case for each load, for each individual consignee, the value does not exceed 750, then also there is an exemption for that. Further, we are also told that services provided by transportation of goods by road, except the services of a GTA, a courier or an inland waterway, will be exempted from payment of GST. So typically you have various scenarios where there is no consignment note issued, and that is what might fit within this entry 18. The whole objective of this consignment note and anchoring the entire discussion based on the consignment note is that we want to have a tax at the last leg, and there can be 5-6 legs in this entire chain. And therefore reverse charge mechanism also comes. So let us say I, as a company, want to get my goods transported. As we saw in the earlier slides, I will appoint a GTA. I will give my goods to the GTA. GTA will give me an LR or a consignment note, which is a negotiable document that constitutes him as a GTA. The transaction between GTA and me is a subject matter of reverse charge mechanism. The company pays the GST on this transaction under reverse charge mechanism. Now comes that person who might appoint another person, who might still appoint the third person, etc. for the transportation of the said goods. Now, when they appoint this entire chain, the entire chain is outside the purview of GTA because none of them will issue a consignment note. There could be only one person who will actually stick his neck out and take the bailment of the goods, and that is the first person interacting with the company, which is the taxable transaction under RCM. And thereafter the entire chain has to be outside the purview of GST, and that's why this entry 18 comes into place. Entry 22, we've already discussed the service by way of giving on hire to a GTA, a means of transportation of goods, which is basically a vehicle. So these are the exemptions as far as GTA is concerned. Now, as we know in GST, because of the dual levy, the concept of place of supply becomes very important in defining whether you will be charging CGST, SGST, or you will be charging IGST. So we are told that the place of supply of services by way of transportation of goods, including by a mail or a courier. And then we have two things, A and B, registered person and other than registered person. And as we know, the place of supply rules are based on the concept generally of a destination principle. In some cases like hotels, etc., we have a source principle, and then we have a hybrid principle where we use source as well as destination. Transportation fits within this type of a hybrid rule where we have, in case of B2B transaction, the destination, which is the location of such person, the address of the service recipient becomes important, and accordingly simplistically IGST can be taken over. And in case of a B2C transaction, a person other than a registered person shall be the location at which such goods are handed over for their transportation. So now this therefore becomes very important for a B2C transaction. The place of supply will be the place of handing over of the goods, and therefore it will result in primarily a CGST, SGST transaction. But in case of B2B transactions, it would be a IGST or it could be C or SGST depending on the address of the registered person. Thereafter, we had a proviso which was introduced later, which says that in case of the transportation is to a place outside India, the place of supply shall be the destination of such goods outside India. Therefore, the place of supply becomes outside India. So this is as far as the place of supply is concerned. We've talked in reasonable detail as far as the road transportation is concerned. Now I will move to the next area, and these areas may be a little bit faster because the road transportation was something which was more important and day-to-day applicable. Therefore, we spent a lot of time on that. We'll now go to the transportation of goods by rail. Now here we have that's clearly taxable. It's taxable under forward charge mechanism, and we have two entries, both of them fitting under HSN 9965, which says that transportation of goods by rail, on which there is a tax rate of 5%, and then transportation of goods by rail by any person other than Indian Railways is 12%. So therefore, what we are told is that for Indian Railways, the tax rate is 5%. For a private player, it will become 12%. And as we know, there are many arrangements whereby a person will take up their entire rake or entire bogie on a lease basis, and thereafter that third person will do the transportation of goods by that rail. In that scenario, the rate increases to 12% instead of 5%. So that is where I think the license holders and other aspects become important. If it is a railway, Indian Railway, then 5. Otherwise, all other persons, the tax rate becomes 12%. Again, just like in GTA, we had an exemption for specific goods. Same way, there is an exemption for transportation by rail for specific transportation of goods like the relief material, defense material, newspaper or magazines, railway equipment, agricultural produce, milk, salt, food grains, rice, pulses, flours, and organic manure. Now, an important aspect which we need to bear in mind is that this entry is slightly different than this entry, and therefore you will have to see whether there is any specific aspect which comes here but does not come there. So depending on the specific mode of the transportation, the answers might change slightly. As far as place of supply is concerned, it's the same rule, section 12, subsection 8, and therefore we may not spend time on it. It's a hybrid rule where if it's a B2B transaction, the address of the registered person, and if it's a B2C transaction, then the location where the goods have been handed over, with an exception that if the transportation is to a place outside India, then it will be the destination of the goods. That takes us to transportation by a vessel by water. And here again we have two entries. 9965 covers it. Transportation of goods in a vessel used in supply. So in this case, there is a rate of 5%, and even for a time charter of a vessel, the rate is 5%. And then there are exemptions, and these exemptions are important. Firstly, we are told service door to door, and for doing that, I will use more than one mode of transportation. In that scenario, it is known as a multimodal transport. And naturally, we are talking about a scenario where a person does all of this under a single contract and does not undertake it as a separate activity, or just does not act as a facilitator, but assumes the responsibility for the performance of the entire contract. Now, in these types of multimodal transport, we are told forward charge will apply, and there's a special rate of 12%. When this multimodal entry came in, and there was a lot of confusion whether it will also apply to international transactions, and thereafter there was a clarification by the GST Council, which also came up as an explanation, which says that this entry will apply only when the door to door, both the ends of the doors are in India, which means basically it's a domestic transportation. For international multimodal transportation, which also is a recognized concept, there is a concept of divisibility, which we will talk of in the next few slides as we move into that zone. So friends, this is what comes up as far as the domestic transportation is concerned. We talked about the various modes of transportation and the different tax implications based on the modes of the transportation. And we ended it by talking about a scenario where there is a multimodal transportation. When you look at international transportation, which is where we'll go into the next slide, you will find that there are various scenarios of these types of multimodal transportation actually happening. And how does the industry how has the industry adapted to it, and how does it treat the entire transaction is what we will see in the next 15-20 minutes of discussion, and then we will go to some controversial issues on this entire transport and logistics sector. Friends, as far as the international transport process is concerned, it's not as simplistic as just putting the goods in a truck and putting it out to making them reach the buyer, and the buyer taking delivery of the goods against the LR. Things become a little bit more complex because there are multiple countries involved, there are customs formalities involved, and therefore the entire shipping process in an international transport starts at the sending stage where there is an export leg, and then ends at the import leg where the other country where there's an import leg. So a shipper or the seller, as we may say, will first want the goods to reach. He ultimately is interested in the goods reaching to the consignee at the extreme right. But for doing that, there are a number of steps which are involved. Firstly, he will have to bring the goods to a warehouse like a container freight station at the port, at the origin port. For doing that, he might have services of a GTA, he might have services of a rail, etc. This in international transport process is in this business sector is known as export haulage. And we'll come to understanding the implications of these a little bit later. From at the origin warehouse, the goods will stay till the time the vessel comes in and it's available for loading, because you cannot synchronize the time exactly. So therefore, there will be some waiting time for which there will be a temporary warehousing at the origin point. While the goods are warehoused in the origin point, there will be customs formalities which will be undertaken. There is a let export order which has to be signed by the customs authority, and for doing that there might be some palletization, there might be containerization, there might be some fumigation tests which might be required. If it's a food product, there might be some additional tests which might be required before the goods can be cleared for export consignment, etc. So all of that would happen, which is the clearance process, and all that handling and clearance processes would happen. And finally, once the LEO, let export order, is signed by the customs officer, the goods will start getting loaded onto the vessel. At the time of loading, there will be a bill of lading issued by the shipping company, and that bill of lading, as we all know, is an endorsable document. The goods would then get transported through the sea, and here we are taking sea example, it could be air also. And things won't change too much, except that instead of the shipping bill, we will use the airway bill as a word. The goods will reach the destination port. Once it reaches the destination port, naturally there will be an import customs formality at the foreign country. And once those import formalities are completed, there would be a warehouse where these goods will be kept immediately. And thereafter, as and when the need be, the goods are shipped to the consignee at the final leg. So, which is the process of import haulage and destination handling. So these are the legs which are involved in this process. And naturally, if I'm an exporter selling goods from India, I will need to appoint so many agencies who are experts into each of these fields. Now that becomes sometimes a bit tricky, and therefore what most of the times the industry does is there will be a single entity who will take up this end-to-end responsibility. And he will say that, look, I will get your goods from here and I will make the goods reach to the end point. Or there might be a scenario where he will take responsibilities of one or more of these 5-6 important legs. Now, depending on what is the type of the activity being done, there were different tax implications under the service tax regime. And typically each of these amounts are charged separately. And therefore the industry over a period of time has evolved to say that we will treat these as divisible contracts. Even though it's the same Mr. X doing all these 5 activities, he will say for export haulage I will charge rupees this much, for origin I will charge this much, for ocean freight I will charge this much, and accordingly he will treat this as what we typically say divisible contracts and apply different tax implications for each of these activities. And in that context, I think the entire industry has always evolved. And therefore, when the multimodal transport entry came in, there was a lot of debate that how do we deal with this entry in the context of international trade, because ocean freight per se is exempted from payment of GST, and indirectly imposing a 12% could have become a little bit of a challenge. And that's where this GST Council meeting, which we just discussed a few minutes back, highlighted that this multimodal transport entry would apply only in the case of domestic transportation and not in the case of international transportation. So this part I have already discussed, that the composite contracts are undertaken to undertake D2D shipments, but the industry has evolved to say that these are divisible services, and the multimodal entry itself through an explanation says that it applies only to domestic multimodal transport, and therefore the industry is fine treating it as separate supplies and warranting a separate tax treatment for each of them. Now, again, one more term which is very commonly used in this industry is prepaid and collect. Now, this is important to understand that when we say prepaid, as we know, the goods move from origin to destination. In case of a prepaid consignment, the freight is paid at the origin point. Before the loading itself, the freight is paid. In a case of a collect shipment, the freight is paid at the destination point. Now, depending on whether it's a prepaid or a collect transaction, because the transacting parties will change, you will find that the place of supply and the exemption entries and all will change slightly. So therefore, this table tries to cover all the scenarios which are possible in case of international treatment, international freight. So we know sea, air are the two primary modes of international movement. In sea, you again have export and import. In air, again, you have export and import. So when I say export and import, it means export of goods moving from India to outside India, and import means import of goods moving from outside India to India. So therefore that gives 4 combinations, and this combination of prepaid and collect in both these examples multiplies these scenarios to 8 different scenarios, and each of them will have a slightly different variation as we move into the detailing of it. So as far as sea export is concerned, and air export is concerned, all these entries are exempted. All these services are exempted under entry 19A and 19B. And because they are exempted from tax, therefore, irrespective of whether it's prepaid or collect, it will not have any major consequences. But as far as import is concerned, air import is exempted under entry 19. But sea import is taxable. Now, sea import again can have 2 variations, prepaid or collect. Now, if it is a sea import collect, now please understand this transaction. Sea import collect means that I am an importer of goods sitting in India. I want my goods to be imported from, let us say, Germany to India. I appoint a shipping line outside India, mostly outside India. I can also appoint a shipping line in India, and I undertake to pay the freight even though the goods are shipped by a German company. This is a scenario of sea import freight collect. This we are told is taxable at 5%. If I am paying to an Indian shipping line, there will be a forward charge. If I'm paying to a foreign shipping line, then it will be a reverse charge. Now, these are typically FOB consignments, and therefore, these types of cases, there is a recipient of service which is an Indian party and it is taxable. The challenge comes in a sea import freight prepaid scenario. Now, what is the sea import freight prepaid scenario? This is a scenario where I am an Indian importer. I import on a CIF basis. We all understand CIF, where the seller is not only bearing the cost and insurance, but also the freight. So in these types of CIF scenarios, where the freight is booked by the German company, most likely he will book the freight with a German shipping line. And in that scenario, he will pay the freight and he will just ship the goods to India. Now you have an Indian buyer who buys these goods. He pays the customs duty at the time of importation. Naturally, the goods value includes this freight indirectly because no person is going to bear the cost himself. He is going to recover it in the sale price of the product. Now, there was a notification under service tax which said that in these types of situations also, the importer of goods should artificially find out the value of this embedded freight and pay a service tax on it. And that notification was carried forward into GST. Now, naturally, there have been fundamental legal challenges on this, and both under the service tax as well as the GST law, high courts have held that these entries are unconstitutional and this tax is not payable. Though, if you look at the notification, it would suggest that the importer will be liable to pay GST under RCM at the rate of 5% or a notional value of 10% of the CIF value. But these matters, high courts have struck down both the notifications, and the matter is right now pending in the Supreme Court. And the verdict of the Supreme Court will be very important in the understanding the tax implications as far as this aspect is concerned. As far as road freight is concerned, we already talked about the fact that if there's a consignment note issued, then it's either an RCM at 5% or a forward charge at 12%. For road freight other than GTA, it is exempted from GST. For logistics support services, you have forward charge at the rate of 18%. And place of supply, we've already talked about this scenario. As far as ocean freight is concerned, this is something which service tax had a lot of legacy attached to the ocean freight. And as you know, a shipping line may not be able to directly enter into contracts with exporters, and there would be a supply chain over there also. Just like, in case of a manufactured product, the manufacturer will not directly sell to the consumer. There will be a distributor, there will be a trader, and there will be a reseller, and then it will come to a retail store, and then finally it will come to your place. Same way, for ocean freight and air freight also, there is a elongated supply chain. There are people who don't own shipping lines, but they would undertake freight forwarding. They would, enter into a contract with a shipping line and say that, look, you give me a particular space at $100, let's say, and I will sell it at whatever dollars I want to. And then he would undertake his own risk. Sometimes he might be able to sell it at 90. Sometimes he might be able to sell it at 110. And therefore, there is this concept called freight forwarding or freight trading on a principal to principal basis. And these types of freight trading, technically, like if let's say there is a buyer of car, a car dealer, he buys cars and he sells cars. So if the car is attracting 28% tax, he will claim the input tax credit of 28% charged by the car manufacturer, and he will charge an output tax of 28%. Same way, when a person is buying ocean freight, a freight forwarder buys ocean freight and sells ocean freight, the tax implication should be that on the buying of the ocean freight, the shipping line should charge whatever GST is applicable, and which should be claimed as a credit by the freight forwarder. And when he sells ocean freight, he should also charge GST applicable on the ocean freight. Now, when you look at this type of a scenario, if there was a tax things would have been very easy. But because there is no tax, the GST is zero at both the ends. And therefore, in service tax regime, this was something which was not palatable to the some of the officers in audit process and all. And therefore, lock, stock and barrel notices have been issued to say that, look, you are saying I have bought freight at $100 and sold freight at $110. But according to me, you are not buying and selling freight. You are only acting as a commission agent. And the difference between $110 and $100, which is this $10 profit which this person has earned, the department alleges that this is nothing but a service given by you by way of marketing the shipping line. And therefore you should pay service tax. This was what started in the service tax regime. Lots of water flowed. There are many decisions, lots of decisions in favor, saying that if the arrangement is on a principal to principal basis, this is a trading of services and therefore there cannot be any service tax implication on the same. I would believe the same aspect would continue as far as GST is concerned also. While all of this was happening, service tax authorities also did what is known as a TDS reconciliation or an ITR reconciliation based notices. And for 15, 16, 16, 17, we've seen that lots of notices have been raised on that account. Again, High Court has come down very heavily on these types of notices because there has been a total lack of application of thought on these types of arrangements. Now, in this scenario, we also have something known as an international freight forwarding, whereby there will be a freight forwarder in India who will appoint another freight forwarder overseas, and then whatever are the profits are shared between the two parties in some predetermined ratio. Now, depending on the model which they have entered into, it may become either a principal to principal model or an agency model. If it's a principal to principal model, then naturally freight being outside the purview of GST, this can typically be out of the entire process at all. But if it's again going into an agency model, then for the marketing and the administrative support, perhaps a view can be taken that this is an intermediary activity. Again, most of the times these agents are located outside India, and therefore even if it becomes an intermediary activity, it would not result in a tax exposure per se. But yes, there would be something which where the place of supply will need to be examined. Now, friends, that takes me through the understanding of the transport sector. And in the note, I was told to cover a few judgments from the old regime. And that's where I think we'll quickly run through some of these judgments wherein for the GTA, they have talked about the importance of a consignment note and various decisions where they have said that in the absence of a consignment note, the transactions are not covered under the GTA service. So you have East India, you have a Supreme Court decision of Kisan Sahkari Chini Mills, where we are told that even if individual truck owners issued bills for transportation and not for consignment note, it is liable under the GTA. Then for a freight forwarder, again the principles of principal to principal versus principal to agent becomes important, and there have been quite a few decisions on that front as well. We are also talking about the records and accounts to be maintained, and we are told that as far as a transporter is concerned, he is required to maintain records of the consignor, consignee and other relevant details of the goods in the prescribed manner. And the person who is in the business of transporting goods shall also maintain records of all of this along with the GST of the registered consignor at each of his branches. So that is the basic record keeping requirement. As far as accounting is concerned, if there is a freight forwarder model, naturally you will find his P&L having freight purchased and freight sold. If it's a freight forwarder in the form of a P2A model, agency model, then he will show only the net income, that is the commission which will be recorded in his books of accounts. Now, while we talk about GTA being again outside the purview of GST, primarily from the perspective of RCM and exemption notification, there's still an important role which GTAs play in the e-way bill. And as we know, in e-way bill there are two parts, parts A and B. A is filled up by the shipper, by the seller of the goods, and part B is to be filled up by the transporter, which basically includes the vehicle number. We are also aware that in many cases, because part A there is a flexibility of anyone can fill up the part A, we are seeing many cases where companies outsource this activity also to the transporter and put the entire onus of e-way bill compliances on the transporter rather than on the company. We are also aware that in cases where there are interceptions and there is some penalties imposed by the officers, many a times the contracts between the company and the transporters clearly spell out that if there are any costs attached or any penalties attached, that penalties will have to be borne by the transporter. So therefore, I think this is something which does come into place as a day-to-day activity. The transporter's obligation primarily, of course, is to carry a valid document, which can be either a tax invoice or a bill of supply or a delivery challan, depending on the scenario. And you should also carry an e-way bill either physically or a number which is mapped to the RFID in a soft copy. And if there is the consignor and consignor has not generated, then the transporter is required to generate. So in all cases, there will be a requirement of an e-way bill which will come into place. So I think these are some of the points which I thought were relevant. As promised, we can have a 15-minute question and answer. Anyone can put in their questions and we can deal with the questions one by one. Makaranji, how would you like to deal with the questions?
Sir, officers will ask the question because there is no question in chat box. So
Okay.
they are free to ask. काही प्रश्न असतील तर कृपया विचारावे.
Kiran Shinde here. May I?
Yes, please. Yes, sir.
Sir, there are 2-3 issues. First, regarding inland waterways. This inland
Yes.
waterways are exempted from this transportation of taxation on transportation, right?
Yes. Yes, sir.
Sir, what about if the ferries from Mumbai Gateway of India to Alibag? Actually, it is not inland. It is a coastal.
No, that
way,
is
but
not
it is
inland. That is coastal.
That is coastal
That will
road.
be taxable.
So that inland means basically it should be a river, lake.
River or a lake. Perfect. The Alibag to Mumbai would be a coastal transportation.
Okay. Basically,
It can't reach the ocean. It can't reach the ocean. Ocean is not inland.
Okay. Second issue is regarding this CIF. Actually, you have told that this is the sub judice now before Supreme Court.
Yes.
Okay, wherever actually Indian importer actually is importing goods on CIF, that freight is paid by the exporter.
Yes, sir.
And it is also made taxable while this he has to pay reverse charge at the rate of 5% on the consideration which he has not paid.
Yes.
He might have paid through the goods valuation. But
Yeah, embedded in the goods value, naturally.
Yeah, can you elaborate on this? Before GST, it is okay because service tax people were not getting service tax on this value which is embedded into the goods value. But in
No,
GST,
I think it's yeah, I mean, with due respect, this is an entire issue which is looked at in a very colored manner by some of the bureaucrats at some point of time, I would believe. Even under the service tax regime, there was really no revenue loss because when I import the goods on CIF basis, I pay customs duty on the CIF value.
right?
And that customs duty included the excise duty component, CVD component, which was equal to the service tax rate in most of the scenarios. So
Right.
even in service tax, there was no loss of revenue because of this type of a situation. The problem which came up was perhaps somewhere there is a bureaucratic approach to look at any situation where there is no tax as a situation of an evasion of tax. Now there is a big difference between these two. With due respect, there's a big difference between a transaction where there is no tax and a transaction where there is an evasion of tax.
It is not.
And because of policy reasons, government may not impose tax in some cases. Because of business reasons, the transaction may be structured in a particular way. So if you look at the two decisions, and I'm sure you would be aware of those decisions, Sal Steel and Mohit Minerals, both of them have come upon very heavily on each of these aspects. It's very nicely analyzed that you can bring a reverse charge mechanism on a recipient. See, any transaction has two people, X and Y. Let it be goods, let it be services. typically we say that the supplier pays the tax. X would pay the tax, assuming X supplies the goods or services to Y. Reverse charge mechanism can push the tax from X to Y, but you can't push the tax to some other person Z.
Yeah.
And that's what is happening. He's not a recipient here. I hope I'm clear.
Basically, this issue was in service tax also.
Yes, it was there in service tax. It's there in GST also.
But there is no logic or reasoning behind levy of tax.
No, somewhere that what they tried to do was they compared CIF with FOB without understanding that you can't compare. It's not an apple to apple comparison.
Okay, okay. And the third question is regarding the logistic services. Actually, you have explained. I am not actually GTA. I am not issuing consign note, but I am taking the contract for you to make the transportation of these goods. And again, I am placing order to the GTA. So that transaction will be what? Whether it will be taxable or whether it will be exempted transaction. Where actually I am not performing the duty of GTA. I am just taking contract from Mahindra and Mahindra for transportation as I am a logistic company. And I am again putting that order to the actually GTA. So GTA under reverse charge will charge to me. But what is the transaction between the logistic company and the Mahindra and Mahindra?
I am aware there is a, I think from Maharashtra, there is this Liberty Translines advance ruling already on this point. There is also a KM Translines from Jaipur, if I'm not mistaken. 2 or 3 advance rulings are there dealing with this transaction structure. Now, to really look at this transaction structure, I tried to touch upon that aspect when I explained this entire objective of consignment note, GTA, and the exemption entries. Please understand who is a GTA. Let's take an example. What you said, Mahindra and Mahindra wants to transport certain products from X location to Y location. He has appointed one Mr. A to do all that logistics for him. Now A does not have his vehicles. He appoints one Mr. B. B also does not have vehicles. He appoints one Mr. C. Now in this scenario, who is the GTA is an important aspect to understand. My personal view, and which will be supported through various discussions, which I will do in the next couple of minutes, is to say that A is the GTA and everyone else is simply a hirer of a vehicle or a provider of a transport service without issuance of a consignment note. Now, this is where we need to understand what is a consignment note. Consignment note is a document which will enable the person to endorse the goods and the responsibility of the goods is taken by that person. Now, naturally, when Mahindra and Mahindra gives goods to one Mr. A, he has a contract with Mr. A. Will he give goods to A on an assumption that A doesn't take responsibility of goods? It's illogical to assume that way or to interpret a transaction in that manner. Therefore, the consignment note should have been issued by A. Now, practically what happens is, for administrative convenience, it's always B who is issuing a consignment note. So people say because B has issued a consignment note, he becomes a GTA and A becomes something else. And then they start questioning what is A. And that's where this entire disconnect comes into place. According to me, A is the GTA. He should issue a consignment note. Mahindra should pay RCM. A doesn't pay any tax because if the transaction goes into RCM, and B, C, D are all not GTAs. They are providing services of transportation or hiring depending on the contractual terms. And all of them are outside the purview of GST. That is how I think the entire structure could be looked at. I hope I'm clear.
Yeah. Okay, sir. I have one more question, but I will ask after the other people. मकरंद देशमुख साहेब दुसऱ्या कोणाला प्रश्न विचारायचा विचारू द्यात शेवटी मी एक विचार
नाही सर कंप्लीट करा तुमचं काही हरकत नाही करून घ्या ना सर
सर दिस इज रिगार्डिंग दिस e-way bill issue.
Yes.
So actually this obstruction has been done and the order has been issued for a penalty, tax and penalty under section 129.
Yes.
Thereafter, dealer files, taxpayer files appeal.
Yes.
And 10% and he receives a stay order.
Yes.
Now there are two views. First view, is once that appellate authority issues a stay order, automatically that stay order is not issued by issuing appellate authority. It is inbuilt in the section 1076.
Yes.
In that case, whether the goods will be released on producing that stay or appeal order of giving stay of part payment, or because in section 129, other view is in section 129, it is a notwithstanding anything contained in the act, the goods will be released on payment of so and so. So one view is that whether you file appeal, whether you pay 10%, your goods will be released only when you will pay full amount of penalty and tax, whatever as per 129. So just throw light on these two aspects, two interpretations.
So I would believe that there is an automatic stay once an appeal is filed. So the process would be, first there would be a show cause notice. Thereafter there will be an adjudication. Once the adjudication is done, thereafter either you pay the amount or you file an appeal with a pre-deposit. Once you file an appeal with the pre-deposit, then the stay is automatically granted for the balance amount. And once the stay is granted, naturally the goods have to be released. And then it will go in the normal adjudication process.
But whole purpose of this 129 will be then defeated, no sir? Basically, he will take that goods by paying 10%, and he will do that.
He's putting his nose into saying that I'm going into appeal. See, the whole objective of taking this 100% and the penalties and all is that you are not sure whether that person is available for adjudication. But the moment the adjudication is done and an appeal is filed, then naturally there is the stay which the legislature has itself thought. See, if you recollect, in VAT also we had a scenario that there was a stay hearing happening, and then individually the Commissioner Appeals, JC Appeals used to take a position on the merits of the case and then issue a stay order. Partial, and same thing was there in service tax. But as time progressed, this was clogging up the entire judiciary and it was not serving a valid purpose. And therefore, sales tax also did the same thing. They made a mandatory pre-deposit, and once the pre-deposit is paid, balance is paid. Same thing applies in GST. So it's a call which the government has taken as a policy that we know that there will be some strong cases, there will be some weak cases, and therefore on an average we want 10%, and there's nothing stopping the appellate commissioner from taking an early hearing rather than holding back the matter for a long period. If there is some doubt of evasion or risk perceived by the commissioner, by the appellate commissioner, he can always prioritize the hearing and dispose of the appeal.
One view is basically this 129 start with notwithstanding anything contained in the act, means whatever provisions are there in the other act, that will not withstand.
No, but 129 itself has all these safeguards which we are talking about. And coming to this concept of notwithstanding, there's a very detailed decision of the Gujarat High Court, an interesting decision which really lays down all these parameters of the notwithstanding. Synergy fatigue, and maybe that is something which might help you understand this entire perspective. Gujarat High Court.
टाइमच पास करायचं साहेब 4-5 तास. बरोबर आहे.
हॅलो
हॅलो
हॅलो.
हा सर येतोय आवाज.
हा नाही झालं आता बेसिकली हा विषय देअर टू व्ह्यूज ऍक्च्युअली अदरवाइज 129 will not be actually the purpose of 129 will be repeated. That was the only issue. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I think we've completed the questions. It's really been my pleasure to be invited and be able to take this session for all of you. Thank you. Makranji, I think we can.
Yes, I will just ask last time whether anybody has any questions. कुणाला विचारायचं का काही प्रश्न? हॅलो कोरपडे सर किंवा अजून कोण लहाने सर काही प्रश्न विचारायचे?
नाही, थँक्यू.
Okay. Thanks a lot, sir, sparing time for us in such a busy schedule, and we will actually look forward for your cooperation on some other topics also on the services, because I've seen on YouTube lot of sessions are there on various service sectors, hospitality sector and other sectors. I have seen your lectures.
Thank you.
So I expect more cooperation from you in the future. Thanks a lot, sir.
It's always my pleasure. You can always tell me whenever we want to do. I'll be available definitely. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Session is संपलंय आपलं आता इथे. धन्यवाद. Sir, could you please share me your PPT?
I will email it to you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.